Larry tried to kill me.
Yeah. I was so thoroughly disgusted.
I mean, think about it. Why does it make you special to do what you do?
Packers jumping around. They rush 4. Plenty of time for John. Now squeezes, steps up in the pocket. Elliott can run inside the 10. Head first. He dives off the 5-yard line. My goodness.
Rushing 4, ball comes out of the hands of Newton. It's on the ground, and it's still on the ground. Picked up by T.J. Ward at the 4-yard line.
There's also Brian Clady and Bob Miller. Third and long 3. Going deep. Oh, and he's got Thomas. Goodbye. Touchdown. Here we go. First snap of the overtime. The Broncos have been in 3 overtime games this year. They won them all. Got him at the 40. It's Thomas at the 50. Stiff arm got him 3 to the 30. To the 20. Thomas to the 10. Goodridge going on to New England. They win it on the first play of overtime.
And welcome to the show. My name is Mundungus Creevy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Glenn, Cam, and eventually Boggins, whenever he decides to grace us with his beautiful faith. And you are currently tuned into the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. We are a fan-led Broncos-based podcast, filling you in on all things Denver Broncos. And I know what you're thinking. Ryan Edwards will join us. It wasn't my fault this time. This was all on Glenn, so don't look at me. I didn't tell nobody any wrong times. Okay? Just wanted to throw that out there to start with. Uh-oh.
Oh.
So how's everybody doing?
I'm got back from Breckenridge, and it was a fun little time, but we were able to fit in MHRT 5280 while I was there, so it was a fun ride, and I'm excited to be back home.
All right then. So I'm so distracted because I'm not used to having games to talk about because we haven't had a game in forever. But we had a football game on Saturday, and literally it wasn't even close. I don't care what anybody says. It wasn't even close.
I mean, if the Cowboys may be the most undisciplined team I've ever seen. I mean, it was just incredible the amount of penalties they had. I mean, even penalties that didn't end up being accepted. I mean, they exceeded 20. I mean, you're right. It was not even close, mainly because they just self-destructed. What a joke. I mean, yikes.
Yeah, I think it was. It definitely certainly seemed like it was a little bit sluggish in the first part, right? But I mean, it certainly seemed like the defense had no issues early on, but it was just kind of the offense kind of, feeling their oats a little bit. And then once they kind of got going, and Josh Johnson settled in between he and Brett Rippon, the game was pretty smooth. And, it was an exciting time for sure, because, I mean, you're looking at it from the standpoint of, everything that is going on. That was like our first Broncos action in what seemed like forever. And I think that, when you look at the game overall, I have to laugh and marvel at the same time how competitive Russell Wilson is. So he didn't play in a single snap, a single, part of the game, but yet with that being the first official action in Power Field, he clearly wanted to make sure that he was dressed head to toe like a Halloween costume, pads and hair and everything, with the helmet and making sure that he was. Yeah, he even had the full-on eye black, but so he didn't play, but he wanted to make darn sure that he was in full-on Broncos gear for his first home game.
Yeah, and did you see they came out with that video of the new locker room?
Oh,
Yeah.
That was sweet. And, I mean, it's not like I can compare it to what it looked like last year. I was never in there, but it looked pretty sweet.
I mean,
well,
the
you could
players
tell who
really
was
liked
playing
it.
and who wasn't because the ones who weren't had the duffel bags above their nameplate and the T-shirts hanging in there. But
Like,
that was pretty cool.
Simmons is sitting in that computer chair, just like chilling with a cup of coffee.
In the middle of the
Melvin Gordon's like, "Who's gonna help me find my locker?" I have no idea where it is.
Gordon was hilarious. He's like, I don't know if this is the Waltons. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's not the Waltons. They just bought it. That would be incredibly quick turner time. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, they have no excuses. They've got a nice, comfy spot there.
Absolutely. And, and going back to the game, I mean, there was a lot of takeaways. Unfortunately, one player in particular that we'll probably end up talking about probably could have had himself an interception in that game. And lo and behold, he's not on the team anymore. But, I mean, it certainly seemed like he was having a decent game from what I could tell. But, that's the unfortunate nature with roster cut days and, stuff like that. It's just the hard nature of the business. And it's one that, for that player, and we'll get into the roster cuts later, but I mean, it was just a little bit unfortunate. It's a sad day. And Nathaniel Hackett mentioned it too. I mean, it's just like, it's such a sad day. And, I have to laugh sometimes when people post certain, story or, quote about like, oh, Nathaniel Hackett made a comment about how roster cuts are, they suck. Mm-hmm. Well, of course they suck. I mean, every single, head coach is going to come out and say, of course that, because, it is sucky. I mean, you're basically telling a person, sorry, you can't be here anymore.
Well, I think like the more that we've done this and the more that we kind of have the knowledge of who each player is, now it's harder for us because it's like, oh, I knew that guy. Well, I knew who that guy was. He was a great player. That sucks. But yeah, I mean, obviously we'll get into roster cuts. I do kind of want to cut back to, I think, probably the biggest takeaway from that game, which is Jonas Griffith dislocated his elbow, is out 4 to 6 weeks. But we did bring in Schobert, right? Inside linebacker from Steelers.
Originally with the Browns, had his most success with the Browns and signed a huge contract with the Jaguars. Ended up leaving them for the Steelers. Played one season with them. Interesting thing about Schobert is he and his wife moved to Colorado, so I think they don't live too far from Cam. But
go stalk him, Cam. Go find him.
Look for the bald guy. So he apparently had turned down other offers to come to other teams because he was hoping the Broncos would pick him up, stay local, and sure enough, it worked out in his favor.
Yeah, I think with Schobert, and I actually posted it on social media and stuff, but I think that I don't know what his impact will be, but it helps when you are training in Colorado pre-team that you are going to be joining. And just so happens the team that he wanted to join and the team that signed him was the Denver Broncos, of course, the team that he was training, the local professional team. And so I think what will really help his development as far as training and everything goes is the fact that he has been here living in Castle Rock, living in Colorado. And I think that for him, when you have that opportunity to acclimate and get used to the altitude before you even join a team, that will give you a little bit of a leg up, because then at that point you are going to be, just soaking in the playbook and, making sure that you're in the right assignments, which apparently, according to Josie Jewell, he was actually quite impressed with Schobert on day one, which that's actually a really good sign. And, even though it may have seemed that when Griffith went down, Singleton certainly seemed like he played well. You have
Sternad. I thought he played pretty well too.
Justin Sternad, who we all know is on the roster bubble, he played pretty well. Do you insert Schobert in the mix? I mean, you're talking about maybe just a little bit of a better, linebacking depth, and it was a position that they all were pretty confident with. I mean, you're not going to move Baron Browning obviously to the pass rush spot without even considering signing someone. So the fact that they did due to an injury, tells you enough. They felt pretty confident about it. But, again, I think it was a pretty solid situation all around.
Cam, you mentioned Baron Browning. I mean, what an impressive outing he had. And the only thing that overshadowed it was all of us fans freaking out that he was still in the game.
He's in there. Well, do we know why he was in there so long?
Apparently he asked for the reps and they allowed that.
That doesn't mean he should get them.
I know. It was the special teams play where then he's laying in a heap on the ground and gets up and limping away. And I'm like, Josie Jewell 2.0. I mean,
yeah,
it was it's crazy stuff.
There was one point, again, I tweeted it, but there was one point I was like, okay, I'm driving to Empower Field and having a talk with Nathaniel Hackett just take him out. But no, I mean, you mentioned Jonas Griffith maybe being the number one takeaway. Baron Browning for me was the number one takeaway for me from that preseason game, because here's a guy that I know it was preseason, but here's a guy that if you're looking at it from a pass rush perspective and maybe one of the better defenders maybe the Broncos had, I mean, it was quite impressive, the showing that he had. So in just one preseason game, for you to be shutting up a lot of doubters, for people that maybe myself included, as far as, people that said, why is he moving to pass rush or edge rusher? He put it to bed. He put it to bed. And, even Nick Bonito really played quite well, the guy opposite of him. And even though it was the first preseason game, the overreaction obviously would be, if the Broncos can have a healthy roster and, healthy pass rush, and, of course, Randy Gregory coming off the PUP, if they can have those guys, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, and then the guys beneath them, guys like Baron Browning and Nick Bonito, perform at that kind of level, the sky's the limit for that pass rush depth, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the only reason that I said Jonas Griffith was the biggest takeaway is because Jonas Griffith was potentially the starting inside linebacker next to Josie Jewell, whereas Browning Whereas Browning is, I would say, more of a rotational guy right now, unless Chubb or Gregory get hurt. And that's why I was saying you basically had an starting inside linebacker go down. And so that's why I was saying him getting hurt was one of the biggest things.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of the nature of the injury. And I think we were fortunate that, it's a 4 to 6 week injury. And it was one that, based on the nature of where things are injury timeline, the Broncos might actually get him right around the regular season, if not a few games into the regular season. Obviously that's not, barring, worst case scenario, which is a setback possibly. But things are still looking to where, the Broncos might have Jonas Griffith still for a vast majority of the regular season. So obviously at that point, who knows what they'll do with Joe Schobert, but you're still, but still, you're talking about maybe still the best case scenario for the Broncos to have it 4 to 6 weeks.
So obviously y'all are not here to stare at our beautiful faces. You're here for the special guest who is continuing the awesomeness of this show, because we're bringing him in. He's one of our all-time favorite people. He hosts Broncos Country Tonight on KOA and iHeartRadio with Benjamin Albright from 6 to 9 Mountain Standard Time. He is the reason behind all of the good thing that happens with the Denver Broncos and the city of Denver, as well as Albright's personal supplier of anything pumpkin spice. He's also Rob Walton's money man. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Edwards. How we doing, buddy?
There's absolutely no way I could live up to that intro, but thanks. I appreciate it. That's
I did everything I could to try to hype you up.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. No, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks.
It's always great to have you on. Now, we've been talking about the preseason game we just had on Saturday. We were talking about Jonas Griffith. Is there anything else we've learned about Jonas Griffith's injury and when he might be back?
Yeah, what I've understood is the Broncos are being cautiously optimistic would probably be a good way to frame it. Week one doesn't feel that likely to me, but I think that they're sort of waiting a little bit to see how he responds to treatments, and then they'll kind of go from there. For me, this is more of like a week 2 conversation, maybe a week 3 conversation. And we've seen with this coaching staff, they take everything slow. They have no problem going with the extra care involved to make sure a guy is completely right. So for me, again, this won't be one of those things where they're going to force him back in there. It doesn't even matter if they really need him or not. They're going to take their time. And I think that's probably the right call.
Ryan, in your opinion, how different was training camp this year versus previous seasons?
It's a good question. And we sort of talked about it on Broncos Country tonight. I thought it was one of the better ones I've ever been to be honest. And maybe it's the music, maybe it's the vibe. Everybody seems to be in a pretty good mood. Russell Wilson's here. Maybe it's Coach Hackett. I mean, it could be a lot of different reasons, right? But I don't really know what it is specifically to put my finger on, other than to say when I've been in training camps, we get to about day 8 or 9, 10, and I'm usually like, man, I'm done. I'm good. It's hot. I'm ready for a game. I'm ready for anything else besides training camp. But this year, I don't know, man. We got to day 11, day 12, and I was kind of like, this is fun. Guys are having a good time. It's been fun getting these interviews. Everybody wants to talk about the team. Like I historically, it is a little bit of a mixed bag, right? I mean, you bring in guys and you bring them onto the show, and they know, right? They know what they're going to be probably. They want to talk positively, but there's an understanding. Hey, we don't. We have a great quarterback situation. Who knows what's going to happen this year? But this year, I mean, you got Russell Wilson, and Nathaniel Hackett's got this really fun vibe where they're competing in all these different pop-a-shot games and all the stuff in the background. So, like I said, this year was a lot of fun. This was one of my more fun training camps I've ever been. It's my 13th year, so I feel like I've got a little bit of a beat on when things are good and when things really aren't.
Ryan, I got to ask you, obviously, for the Tim Patrick injury, it's a significant blow for that wide receiver room. However, in the case of, maybe even a case of bringing a wide receiver in that's, off of another team or even a veteran wide receiver, that first preseason game that we saw sort of kind of put to bed all sort of rumors really of the Broncos really even bringing anyone in because of the way that the wide receiving group even performed. And we saw a wide receiver, Travis Fulgham, get released today. But really the wide receiver room just as a whole just really shined bright. Anybody, you name it, really performed quite well. Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil, Kendall Hinton, Seth Williams, Hall of Fame quarterback, right? Wide receiver Kendall Hinton did quite well. So, I mean, how exactly do you see that wide receiver room shaking out? Is it conceivable that the Broncos don't just carry 6 wide receivers, but they actually carry 7 wide receivers?
Yeah, I'd say it's a strong possibility, right? I mean, you see the way they're performed, and those opportunities are only going to increase now that you've thinned out a couple of wide receivers in the room, right? No Caden Davis. He was obviously released. Travis Fulgham was released. So you think that the opportunities, Trey Quinn, this is it. That you sort of like, if you're going to get a chance to make this roster, even the practice squad, you've got to make a run here. The Buffalo game, you got the Minnesota game. These are their opportunities. But 100%, I mean, you think Montreal Washington, if you just pencil him in at number 5, right? Number 4 is right now Kendall Hinton. So number 5 would be Montreal. And then you'd say 6 and 7 are kind of up for debate. I think Jalen Virgil has certainly showed quite a bit there. He's had some big plays in training camp. Some of the biggest receptions that we've seen out there have come from Jalen Virgil. So I sort of think that he has a good spot. I think Brandon Johnson's been the guy that's been running with the ones the most of that group. And so, even today when we were watching practice, Brandon Johnson's out there running when they go 3 wide because, again, KJ Hamler's not available right now. But Kendall Hinton, again, is mixed in there as well. I mean, he's getting plenty of opportunities. So, for me, I put Brandon Johnson in that conversation. You talk about Seth Williams, who's a second-year player. He's made some nice contested catches. Had a little inconsistent during training camp, but I think that if he shows up big in the games, they have to consider that. Don't forget about Tyreek Cleveland either, who Dwayne Stukes called a core special teamer. So, again, you kind of throw in the mix of all those guys, and certainly I think getting to 7 is probably the number because they have to also play special teams. But it seems to me, as long as they feel like they're getting value on special teams and they can maybe mix some of these guys in as receiver, and they also have to understand who could potentially sneak onto practice squad. That's going to be a bit of a factor in this as well. I mean, again, if these guys keep playing like they are, that's going to be a difficult conversation too. So again, long kind of winded answer here. I think that it's a really intriguing competition that I think over the next 2 preseason games we're going to learn more about.
Ryan, as a pumpkin spice latte enthusiast, who are your top 3 Broncos to watch in the next game?
Man, you're always going to get a good answer out of me with that. Top 3 Broncos to watch. Well, I mean, let's start with Baron Browning, right? I mean, he's going to continue to play. He wants to play. So Baron Browning, can he continue to dominate? And one of the things we see oftentimes, and we sort of put out there is, okay, is a guy looks talented. Is he dominating when he's going up against his matchups, especially if he's going up against 2s and 3s? You remember when Jerry Jeudy was drafted first overall, or in the first round for the Broncos, and that very next training camp, just blowing everybody away. He was playing on the second team, and he was shredding everybody. Had just tremendous upside, and that's what he should be doing, right? Well, Baron Browning's been looking like that out of training camp. He's gotten a few opportunities there with the 1s, but most of the time he's been working with the 2s, him and Nick Bonito opposite each other. So they should win those matchups. And that's what we got a chance to see. So I want to see more Baron Browning. I want to see more Montreal Washington. I sort of feel like his skill set, especially as they're working KJ Hamler back, could be really valuable with this offense. Now, of course, they need a guy that has sure hands. That's what Tim Patrick brought. But Cortland Sutton has looked just unreal out there. You want to go back to what he was in 2019 when he was a Pro Bowler. He looks every bit like that, and even maybe more confident because his quarterback is a little bit better. So I'd say Montreal is certainly a guy that I have an eye on. I'd probably go – I'm trying to think here. You want 3, right? Is that what you said? I got lost in the pumpkin spice thing. So
don't we all?
Yeah. I'll tell you what. I'll say Damari Mathis. I'm really intrigued by Damari Mathis. Yeah. And he has been getting some time with the 1s. Even today when they went to dime, he was out there. So I'd say, again, I'm one of the biggest Michael Ojemudia guys out there. He's certainly on this roster. So is Mathis, in my opinion. But Mathis could be intriguing, especially if you do have another injury, say to Ronald Darby. Hopefully not ever past Sertan, that kind of thing. But if you have an injury, Damari Mathis as an outside corner is really intriguing, and I want to see more from him.
So I kind of want to go into the offensive and defensive line. Now, there was this big battle in training camp on whether the offensive line looks bad and the defense is just that good, or whether the offensive line can be fixed or what have you. And it looked like during that game, the offensive line had a really tough time getting the running going, but they also had a tough time stopping the run on the defensive side. Is that just because we don't have good enough depth behind the line, or is it something schematically that we can kind of fix?
It's a really good question. And at this point, you make a great observation on most of training camp when you're like, okay, is this the D line dominating, or is the offensive line having some issues? And sometimes it can be a little bit of both, right? I mean, we could say multiple things can be true. When you see it out there, and the fact that they had dominated against Dallas during the scrimmage, and I mean, that was a lot of first team, right? But they dominated against Dallas in the scrimmage on Thursday, and then they get out to the game and they look like they're getting pushed around. It makes you wonder a little bit about the depth. Now, Natani Moody, who would have probably been out there with the second team, is not available. So I think that would have helped strengthen a little bit. I think you also see the drop-off maybe at offensive tackle, especially with Quinn Bailey. And then you're also wondering a little bit about Calvin Anderson. And I'll tell you right now, they've been cycling in a little Cam Fleming. Now, I don't know if that's the answer. I don't think that's the answer. I kind of hope it's not the answer. No offense. But again, I think that they want to, initially there was hey, Calvin Anderson's taking all the snaps at right tackle. Maybe they want to see what it looks like with some other guys, see, when they go back and look at the film practices, does it look like we're better there, or does it look about the same? And then, again, when Billy Turner, who I don't expect to be ready for the beginning of the season, when he's inevitably ready, what other options could they possibly have there? I still think Calvin Anderson is their best option right now. But certainly, like I said, when you saw the second team all working together, and I'll throw one more thing in there. Remember, you'll never see, I say this knocking on wood. You'll hopefully never see the entire second team offensive line starting. Like you'd see spot starters, right? But they never all work together at the same time.
Ryan, have you heard any Randy Gradishar updates? Have you ever heard any updates for Randy Gradishar's candidacy today with the senior committee meeting?
I haven't. As we've been speaking, I've seen a few sort of things flash on my screen, so I haven't had a chance to look. But no, I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. There's again, it depends on who you're talking to, right? Some people are like, I got some cautious optimism, and then I got the other side saying, no way, like Broncos are always getting screwed out of these things, and I don't know. I don't really. There is, sometimes on these things I have a pretty good beat on what it is. When it was Steve, when it was Mr. B, like we had a pretty good beat on it. But I don't for Randy. So if somebody's got it out there, then that's great. But I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay. So Ryan, I want to circle back a little bit on the wide receiver room and of course the pass rush room. With that wide receiver room, and being so competitive a little bit, it might possibly ponder the idea of maybe another Trinity Benson situation. Or even for the standpoint with the pass rush that we saw and the emergence of guys like Nick Benito and Baron Browning. It might force some decision making with say a guy like maybe a Malik Reed. Could we see a guy like a Malik Reed or say maybe a wide receiver, maybe even just for the Trinity Benson trade that we saw last year beyond the move? I mean, could we see that? I mean, I know that there's been some talk that maybe George Payton wants to recoup picks, right? I mean, so could we see that possibly in the cards?
I absolutely think that's what he's considering. In fact, I know they are getting calls on some offensive linemen, so that's another one to keep in mind and throw in there. But yeah, right now the way you have to kind of look at it for where the Broncos are at is they are kind of open for whatever, as long as they feel like their depth is in pretty good shape. But again, you don't want to, knowing that you're in a window right now with Russell Wilson. You want to keep that in mind, whatever deal you make. And if you're getting, and also again, I think George Payton's got a pretty good idea of value. So like, for example, Von Miller, he wasn't moving Von Miller unless they came at him with a king's ransom, right? A second and a third, which again, I was one to say on Broncos country, and I never thought they'd get. I never thought they'd get that much. And we even were getting a sixth rounder. Was a sixth rounder for Trinity Benson, I think.
Fifth
I mean,
fifth and a seventh?
Yeah.
And they gave Benson and a sixth or something.
Right. That's what it was. Yeah, right. I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, we all like Trinity Benson, but that's incredible. Yeah. Like, what are you supposed to do there? You got to make that deal. Kerry Vincent, they got a higher draft pick. They got a higher draft pick than what he was taken at. I mean, what are you supposed to do? You just go ahead and say yes, right? Unless you think that this guy's a core player. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody came at them and said, "Hey, we'll give you a fifth rounder for one of these wide receivers that we really love." And, say Jalen Virgil or something like that. I mean, get turned down a fifth rounder for a guy that was undrafted? Like, of course not. So I 100% think that they're in the mindset of that. But understand also, again, a lot of teams really value their players. And so it is sort of difficult to make these deals unless a team really comes at it and says, no, this is a player that we see as a lock for our 53-man roster. And again, we don't see a lot of those deals get done very often, but George Payton has always got his ear to the ground.
Speaking of getting deals done, I have been poking around trying to get some information on one Draymond Jones. He has just continued to be an absolute monster, but there is no information out there. No one's heard anything, to my knowledge. When do you think that pot gets stirred a little bit more and we get him signed?
He's one of those guys, along with, say, Bradley Chubb. I mean, just as you get into the season, they want to get Russell Wilson done as well. It's just kind of a mix of guys that they want to see how they perform this year. If Draymond Jones takes a pretty big step forward, I think that they really like him and they would like to get something done there. It also kind of depends on the health of DJ Jones and what he's doing. Of course, they play slightly different positions right there on the defensive line. What you expect from both of those guys. You need Draymond Jones to not only be good against the run, you need him to be able to rush the passer, where DJ Jones oftentimes what they're hoping to do is have him eat gaps. Same thing with Mike Purcell. So it's just a little bit different on the way they view that. But if Draymond Jones comes out like I think he's going to, he certainly will be in that conversation. Dalton Reiser is another name. If they don't deal him, is he a contract you're going to try to get locked up now? Or are you going to let him walk in free agency? So there's a few guys that they have decisions to make. I think the first one, of course, is Russ, and they want to get that done before the season wraps. And then it's what has Bradley Chubb done? How do we feel about the rest of our pass rush depth? And then I think Draymond's probably, and again, this is me speculating, but I think Draymond's a little bit lower on that, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't get it done first. It's just kind of whatever works out faster kind of deal.
Would you put Draymond lower on the priority list than Bradley Chubb?
No, I wouldn't actually. I'd put him higher, and only because of the investment you made in pass rush and in your edge depth. So I would actually put him higher. But I know they really like Bradley, and there's a organizational kind of view of Bradley because they took him 5th overall, even if it wasn't George Payton's pick. And they, like I said, they like his locker room presence. They like a lot about Bradley Chubb. So it's not one of those. Again, sometimes these deals get done not necessarily in the order you started negotiating them. So you have to. It's like some people think, oh well, priority is this, and this. It's like, well, Draymond actually might be the first one done before Russ, right? I mean, that could happen. It's just a matter of when agents and guys, everybody gets back to each other.
So first, before I get into my question, Jeffrey Bryan wants to know if there's any hunch on starters playing at all next game. Are we going to see starters at all?
You know, listen, I was a proponent of seeing them play a little bit, but listening to Nathaniel Hackett today, he does not sound like a guy that's in any kind of hurry to put starters out there. So. Good. Yeah, well, and I don't know. I feel like there's some value, at least for the first team offense, to get out there and especially the offensive line to do a little bit of hitting and for the run game. I mean, Javonte Williams has not been tackled to the ground yet, so there's some value in that. I think there's some value.
Or ever.
That. Yeah, right. Maybe he plays the whole season, never gets tackled. We'll see. He just keeps running like Forrest. Yeah. So yeah. I think there's value in it, but I also, again, it's one of those, like, you don't have to twist my arm to point out what can happen. You just saw Jonas Griffith, right? It's a perfect example, right? So you don't have to twist my arm on that. But listening to Nathaniel Hackett today, it doesn't sound like he's really pressed to do that. And there's this mindset, Sean McVay doesn't play a single starter during preseason. There's a mindset from some of these new coaches where they don't really see the value in doing that. They don't want to push it, and they don't want to risk anything because we know how significant it can shift the entire view of your season if someone goes down. I mean, you lose your quarterback, anybody loses their quarterback, and we're just talking about a completely different. You're talking about next season almost immediately. So I understand the rationale if they decide not to.
So I kind of want to go back to an oldie but a goodie. We're going to talk about some quarterbacks. The only difference is that we're actually talking about the backup quarterback, not the backup that's starting for the Broncos. So there's been this big thing between Josh Johnson and Brett Rippon. Me personally, I think that Johnson showed more last game, but Rippon had less to work with. So are we going to see Rippon start the second game? Is there a quarterback that's got the leg up on the backup competition right now? What are we looking at?
It's a good question. I'd say it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think he named it today, but it wouldn't surprise me if Rippon got the start this next time. If they decide not to start Russ, right? It wouldn't surprise me if Rippon got those opportunities. They really do want it to be a competition for the backup position. They are not giving it to Josh Johnson, but on the other side, it's hard to ignore the experience, right? I mean, if just nothing else, like whether it's a bit of a punchline, his experience or not, it's legit, right? I mean, it is something that if your starter goes down, you want a guy that has experience, and Brett Rippon has the one game against the Jets. And, Brett Rippon is going to be a very good coach in this league, inevitably. Like, I think one way or the other, whether it's NFL or he starts out in college, he's going to be one of those, just super sharp guy, starts out as a quarterback's coach, eventually works into an OC role. It wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up one day being a head coach. But right now, if you're looking at, okay, if Russell Wilson went down, who would I trust? That's the question the coaching staff has to ask. And I think that is probably Josh Johnson if you're asking me today.
Ryan, what's your favorite behind the scenes moment of this training camp that you're able to share?
Able to share.
Oh, yeah. Man. Wow. Yeah, I'd have to think about that for a minute. Again, be able to share is the important.
So nothing with Mario.
Oh no, nothing with Mario. That's a good question. I mean, we have a lot of like side conversations, not only media, but sometimes with the players. Okay, I'll give you one. I can use some language on this. Yeah, so
we've all heard it before. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's not even that bad. I can actually probably say it on the radio, but I have this like thing when I go into radio mode that I just don't use language ever, and then as soon as the mics go off, we're all sailors, right?
Yep.
But yeah, so a player after the Dallas scrimmage, I talked to a couple of guys, and before I even turn on the mic, they were basically like, we beat their ass. Like they were like before I even said anything, like, hey, how was practice? How's it been going? They were like, we beat their ass. Like, and you heard it on the Broncos like video they put out.
Right.
But they, like, to a man, like every single, like, I talked to an offensive, defensive guys, and like I couldn't even get the microphone on fast enough, which is probably good because I probably couldn't have used it. But other expletives were shared. But that was like before I could even say anything. An offense player and a defensive player, like, I'm like, man, how that was fun out there. They're like, we beat their ass. I'm like, okay. I was like, all right, man. Just reminded the Sun Radio, it's not serious. It's not Sirius XM. Let's just keep it. Let's keep it a family hour. Just keep family hour. So
there was this whole big thing on Twitter. People like, I want to know who said we beat their ass. Who was that?
Well, I mean, I know the guys that I talked to that said it, but yeah, I mean, they were just and it was cool too because they've been and these guys hear it, right? And I talked to a couple of guys, like they heard the Coach Hackett isn't doing enough to toughen them up, right? These practices are too easy, and they heard all that noise, right? And they really wanted to show everybody, including the Dallas Cowboys, that is just a complete joke as far as a storyline, a narrative about this team. It was personal to them. And you'd think it'd be the other way around, right? The Dallas Cowboys, who got punked on their field last year, would have come into Denver and looked to exact some kind of revenge to really get back at the Broncos. But it was, again, the other way around. The Broncos defense was instigating 7 fights over on one field, and on the offensive side, the Broncos couldn't stop scoring touchdowns in the red zone. The only thing that was a bit of a negative is Calvin Anderson versus Micah Parsons. But again, can you really blame Calvin Anderson? Because Micah Parsons is really freaking good. But yeah, that was, the guys have all heard it, and privately had a few conversations with players that, they almost, again, guys use all sorts of things for chip on their shoulder, right? And so this was just one more chip on their shoulder. Okay, all right, y'all think we're not doing enough out here to get ready for the season. Okay. All right. We'll show you. And I've been on the other side of that. I've watched, Vic Fangio practices where he just ground those guys into the ground, and they left mentally, physically exhausted. And before the season even started, they were just they were done. And I've watched that happen. And then so this other way sounds like, super cuddly and fuzzy, where everybody gets these walkthroughs every 3 days. The guys are getting a lot out of it, and like I said, I think they wanted to show it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask. Obviously, it was a really tough day. It was cut day for some players. I mentioned about Travis Fulgham earlier, and we talked a little bit about Jamar Johnson at the top of it. And Jamar Johnson probably was the surprise of the very early round of cuts. Who are maybe, in your estimation, Ryan, like maybe some of the players that are on that roster bubble, or maybe put themselves in the category of maybe a surprise cut candidate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, surprise cut's always it's a touchy thing, right? Because you almost intentionally try to find names that, and I'm not saying it's a bad question. I'm just saying it's like you're trying to intentionally find names of guys that you're like, oh, okay, well, this guy could be a bit of a surprise cut. I guess if I was going to throw one out there, I think he's on. But if I was going to throw one out there, maybe like an Isang Bassi. And that's where they feel like K'Wan Williams, Damari Mathis. They might think like Bless Austin. Now, again, Isang's been the guy playing in nickel since K'Wan went down. But he's also been the guy that's been burned a lot out there, especially by Jerry Jeudy. Now, Jerry Judy's a tough cover for everybody. By the way, it was a great moment yesterday with Pat Surtain covering Jerry Jeudy in the slot. Oh, man. So Jerry Jeudy was beating everybody. I mean, he's beating everybody. And then Pat Surtain was on him for the final play of practice, and PBU, man, not even a worry. It was just Pat Surtain, and it's his world, and we're all just hanging out in it. But anyways, back to your question. I think that this team came into training camp with a pretty set roster, at least at the starters. We kind of knew, okay, well, these are the guys, the DBs, right? The nickel starting, right? Even when you get to dime and include Caden Stearns in that conversation. We knew who the starting inside linebackers were likely going to be, the starting defense. So like there was only like a little bit on the offensive line, but we knew kind of who's making it. So I don't know. I don't know if we're at a point where there's really a lot of surprises. Even Travis Fulgham, who I was singing the praises of in the offseason, was just dominating during OTAs. I thought he could continue to do that during training camp, but he didn't. And other guys stepped up, and they sort of forced the issue in that receiving room. So right now, nobody today was so much a surprise, maybe a little earlier than expected, but all those guys that they moved on from today were firmly in the roster bubble conversation. And if we got to the next cut down and they were gone, I don't think it would have changed, much.
Oh, one storyline that didn't get a ton of motion was the Nathaniel Hackett versus Dan Quinn. I feel like that was probably decently big for Nathaniel Hackett, as much as he wouldn't want to admit it. Do you feel like that was probably a big thing for him to be able to go out there and just completely dominate who would have been the front runner for the Denver Broncos head coaching position?
I mean, it could have been a little bit, right? I mean, I know for a fact last year when the Broncos played the Dallas Cowboys, Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur made it a mission to embarrass the Dallas Cowboys, because they heard all the rumors about the coordinators there in Dallas, and they basically said, we're going to go out and show these guys that they're not very good. And it was like the game that they were like, we're going to be really good. I don't know if we're going to be good the rest of the year, but this is the game we're going to be really good at. But yeah, I mean, it could be a little bit of that. I'd say for Nathaniel Hackett, though, I think he's got loftier goals in mind. And I think that he also knows that he needs his team to be playing well almost right away. So I think more than anything, he wanted to show a core competency. You saw how he made some slight adjustments. He started to call the offense a little bit different after they got to that slow start, started to mix it up a little bit. I think he really wanted to put on a show a little bit out there in front of the home fans. I think they wanted to show that. And, my favorite part really of the preseason game was the 2-minute drill, the 1 minute drive before half. The way he executed the way they executed that, Montreal, Washington, running the ball over to the ref. I mean, all of it, like for all the questions we had about Vic Fangio managing things, Nathaniel Hackett in one preseason game answered probably a dozen of those questions for a lot of fans. So for me, if you came into that game going, I wonder how this is going to look, you saw a shell of what they're going to be, because it's all 2s and 3s, and yet they look just as prepared as any kind of starting team out there. They look like they were ready to go.
As Ben had tweeted earlier, I believe he's something about that you could tell Hackett plays Madden based on his clock management skills. And I feel like that's probably pretty accurate. You do learn a lot about clock management in Madden. If nothing else you learn in that game, clock management is something that you learn.
Oh, for sure. Right. And I mean, again, anybody that's played Madden gets it. And I think sometimes there's this scoffing nature of people that's like, oh, well, Madden compared to the real game. It's, but it's like, well, listen, man, a lot of those guys play Madden, and there's a little bit of the, video game nature of fantasy football and the way the offense has gotten all the breaks now in the NFL, and how they continue to basically tell defensive players, don't even breathe on the quarterback and be careful to even breathe on the wide receivers. And so, I mean, it's in a lot of ways you start to think about it in terms of that. And Nathaniel Hackett is a guy that is of that generation that plays Madden and pays attention to that stuff.
Yep. Well, Ryan, I know that you're a busy guy, and I do not want to monopolize too much of your time. I know you've got kind of a day off, I guess. So I want to thank you for joining us. All of your social media tags, iHeartRadio, KOA, all your descriptions tags are all down below in our description on the show. So I want to thank you again for joining us. It's always great when you join us. So I'm glad you're able to.
Appreciate it, fellas. Anytime. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Ryan.
You have yourself a good rest of the night.
All right, you too. Thanks, guys.
See ya. That's always fun when Ryan joins us. I like Ryan.
He's the best.
He really.
I forgot to even ask, does Albright drink pumpkin spice latte while he's in Hot Topic, or is it like an outside Hot Topic?
No, he's a Gadzooks guy. Remember?
Okay. Sorry.
Gadzooks.
I was gonna say I'd have to.
Smitherson is a hot topic guy.
It's an inside joke between Ryan and I. But I mean, I would have bought him a pumpkin spice latte from a Starbucks that's 10 miles away because it's an inside joke between Ryan and I.
Mm-hmm. So I was gonna make a joke how I routed him up when we played football when I was over there in Denver, but then I thought about how I thought I was open at one point, and we came back and I was like, man, I was so open. He's like, no, you weren't.
No, you weren't.
I was like, oh, okay, well, shoot.
So I do kind of want to run it back to something Cam had talked about earlier when we talked about players being released. We did get the first list, and I don't know if it's been added to or not. But Max is it Borgie or Borgie? Borgie. Max Borgie, Caden Davis, Travis Fulgham, Jamar Johnson, and Rodney Williams were all let go today. Which kind of answers a little bit of, and Ryan talked about the wide receiver room. Because, I mean, there are legitimately 8 or 9 receivers that could be on this team, but they're only going to bring in 7. So how do you bring it down? Maybe 7. So how do you bring it down to 6 or 7?
I think Trey Quinn's probably going to be off the roster.
Yeah.
I think the interesting one is going to be Tyree. How much they value him as special teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you almost think it comes down to Tyree and Seth Williams.
Or Jalen Virgil.
Or Virgil.
I
think Brandon Johnson showed enough, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really how much it's going to come down to each coach, like the receivers coach, Zach Azani, and just like how much they value how much they can put into a conversation and be like, this is my guy. This is who I want. I want him on the team. And it's going to be the odd man out that's unfortunately going to get the boot. But I think that they'll hopefully come back on practice squad at least.
So, when Ryan mentioned Montreal in the 2-minute drill, running the ball and handing it to the official, and how heady of a play that was. The next play, Brandon Johnson ran it to the official too. I mean, these guys have been taught. They're rookies. They're young. And think about this fact. I mean, we're trying to piece together our best guess for the top 7 receivers on this team. And that's with Tim Patrick's spot being available. Can you imagine had Patrick not been injured and then all of a sudden there are really only 2 spots available for all these talented players? It's really going to be very, very interesting. And Ryan also referenced, who can you sneak onto the practice squad? And, how does that play into, the final cuts and who makes the final 53?
When I think even to the practice squad point, we see at times a lot of those players get protected, right, Glenn? I mean, so we see those players get protected, and we see those players even show a lot of value for maybe even other teams to where they want to pry them from that practice squad. So, like, let's just say they keep, for whatever it's worth, like Jalen Virgil on the practice squad, right? I mean, they need to be darn sure that, no other team is going to come in and swoop him, and so you're going to have to protect him, almost every single week to ensure that, he's not going to be snatched up. And so I think that it's such a very interesting conversation, in particular with that wide receiver room, because I think there was so much, I think, belief, like going into the season that the wide receiver room was good. But we didn't necessarily know if it was going to be this good, even after the first preseason game. And the fact that you didn't just see, one wide receiver, turn a really good performance, or 2 wide receivers turn in a really good performance. You actually saw maybe all 3 or 4 of the wide receivers that you needed to see perform, and they absolutely performed. Jalen Virgil even got a shout out from Nathaniel Hackett in the locker room speech. At the end of it. And so, I mean, guys like Virgil and Johnson and, Kendall Hinton and, all these guys, Seth Williams, like all these guys, they need to separate themselves. And if you're going to be able to separate yourselves, you might just want to separate yourselves and also make yourself available for another team as well.
Yeah. And I kind of want to go off of what Jeffrey Bryan just said. Have you noticed that we have not said one bad thing about special teams at all? Nothing.
Respect.
Well, I think that maybe that's kind of the underrated, maybe point of the entire special teams, right? Is that of preseason 1, we didn't have one, preseason blunder, in preseason one. Alas, the Raiders ended up giving up a huge return to the Minnesota Vikings, and we all know who the special teams coach is with the Raiders. But so it's
Good
just,
luck.
so it's definitely one where I feel like it was definitely underrated in that fact.
Yeah, now I did point out something to Glenn earlier because I didn't notice. I watched the game back again, and in the second half, Graham Glasgow was playing center, and I didn't even notice when the game was going on. It seemed like the running game picked up a little bit more when Graham took over at center. Do we think that Graham Glasgow is the backup center now instead of Wattenberg? I don't know if Wattenberg was ever considered the backup, but has Graham set himself as the backup now?
That's what I kind of think the plan was or is that Graham is kind of the versatile piece in the middle, whether or not that's a center, left, or right guard. I think Wattenberg's got a little bit to go, needed to bulk up a bit. But I think Graham is kind of the vet that they trust a little bit more for the depth of all those positions.
Graham's probably your insurance policy. I mean, that's probably the best way to say it. Like, he's your insurance policy. And even though I think it was a tweet that came out today that Wattenberg is day to day, I think I saw a tear on Boggins' face. Hopefully Wattenberg gets healthy. But I think that he was definitely the insurance policy for Glasgow. And so I think that, for him, it doesn't necessarily matter because even on the unofficial depth chart, like, he wasn't the backup center, right? And so but I think we all kind of had an inkling that maybe he was the backup center because of the fact that he's played center professionally for quite some time. So
Okay, so I did want to kind of, and we talked about it earlier, but I know that Boggins was sending out a lot of tweets about how excited he was that Baron Browning was playing so much in that game, especially on the special teams.
No.
Not at all.
No.
Do you think he plays next game, or do you think he's sitting the whole thing?
Of course, he's not going to sit the whole thing, but I want him to sit the whole thing. I would not care if any of the starters didn't play a single preseason game. That is completely fine with me. I want them to rest up as much as possible. They can get the rust out in the first game against the terrible Seahawks. Knock on wood.
So, did anyone pick on the fact that he said Baron Browning and starter? I'm just,
I mean, what? I'm like,
it is a weird.
What is a starter though? Like, because you rotate so much. Like, a starter is a guy who plays the first snap. Other than that, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to play the most snaps. So, does it really matter if he's just? I don't know. Because obviously you don't think he's going to start before Chubb or Gregory unless they get hurt, right?
But I think that that's just the valuability of Browning. And I think that it's going to be a tough decision for George Payton near the end of this year, maybe even mid-season. But Baron Browning, maybe and/or Nick Bonito is going to make Bradley Chubb expendable if they keep their play up. I mean, it's just a conversation that is just going to end up being had. And if Baron Browning, not to mention one play, but I think that if you go back and watch the tweet that was sent out by Frankie Abbott at Frankie Films or something, I think that's his Twitter handle, but he clipped a certain play where Browning literally spun and almost dipped underneath the tackle and sacked DiNucci, the quarterback for the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. It was a ridiculous play, and even to the point where he even did the Von Miller dance at the very end of it. I mean, so if those are the kinds of plays that you can regularly see from Browning, I mean, that's one where you are going to see him make Chubb expendable.
Yeah, I think Chubb already is expendable, don't you guys? I mean,
maybe
see him being here next year.
I think he's at the point where he's got to earn it.
Yeah,
I don't think he's expendable. I think he's still a solid edge, and those are hard to find. However, I don't think he's going to get what you would normally pay a top 5 edge, top 5 draft overall edge in their extension year. I think it'll be very interesting, whatever Peyton decides to do. I don't think he'll let him test free agency because if he actually wants to keep him, because I think that he will get signed.
Yeah.
Let me quantify. Go ahead. Finish.
No. I do think he has value. Unless they are completely smitten over Baron Browning and they're like, that's our guy.
Yeah, I was going to just quantify my remarks. When I say he's expendable, I'm not saying like we should get rid of him right now.
Yeah.
I'm saying that I don't see him being the starting edge rusher a year from now.
Well, what I was going to say, and the other guy that, we haven't even mentioned, if at all, that also could even supplant himself within that true depth of the pass rush is Jonathan Cooper, and so, I mean, Jonathan Cooper, obviously he's been a little bit hurt, but I mean, you throw him into the ring, I mean, you're talking about just a whole on unit and depth that, very well might even make a guy like Malik, we talked about it with Ryan, a guy like Malik Reed, even expendable. Yeah.
So I kind of want to get some quick hits from the game that I kind of put down. PJ Locke had that really nice interception in the game. That was sweet. And I don't know if that was a bad pass or just in the right position.
Oh, it was a bad pass.
That was a good catch.
Was a good catch.
Flashes of big play offense, like even having Johnson and then Rippon in there, you could see that the offense was loaded to go deep. I am very excited for when Russell Wilson gets in there with the starters and the big play offense.
They had a lot of Russ plays. That's for sure. Those sideline balls are all Russ.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys. And we know certainly the pass regime probably would not have done this, but that 40-some yard bomb to Jalen Virgil at the 1 yard line got me absolutely excited because you rarely even saw something like that from the Denver Broncos, pass regime and pass head coaching, regime. And so to see something like that where you don't normally take those chances, you took that chance even in preseason, it's something that I think that the Broncos might actually even adopt, even into the regular season.
You mean exactly like camera actually had to move in order to?
Yeah, what was up with the camera?
There was one point where the camera actually even zoomed in on the punter of Dallas, and I'm like, I don't want to focus on the punter.
Move it over to Montreal.
I like the jogging sideline guy, like trying to get to his next position. Wrong one.
Oh, see, wrong.
Someone didn't label their cameras.
So we probably shouldn't gloss over this because you did pull up Ty's comment earlier, but Schefter had tweeted out that Drew Lock was going to get the start for the Seahawks against the Bears on Thursday. And then a subsequent tweet not too long after that Drew Lock has tested positive for COVID and is not playing on Thursday. So
Fangio strikes again. That son of a
kid can't catch a break.
Right? Oh man. Okay, so also some roster updates, and then I kind of want to go into the preseason game next. Hackett and Ryan talked about it earlier. Hackett says guard Muti had a knee procedure. Will be out for a couple weeks. So we won't see him for a little bit. Also, Ojemudia and Turner Yell are fine. They were being evaluated for concussions during the game, but it turns out that they're okay, so they should be playing. Gregory's off PUP now, right?
He's off the pup.
Gregory and Turner both.
And Turner's allowed to practice too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So are we going to see more Billy Turner, or are they going to stick with Calvin Anderson at right tackle?
I would leave him.
Let him rest still.
Let him rest.
Right. But so let's say going into game 1 of the season, are we seeing Anderson at right tackle, or are we seeing Turner?
I guess it'll depend on how they perform in training camp. Like if Billy comes in and he just looks insanely competent, I mean, between him and Calvin, it's going to be very, very close. So I just think it's going to be whoever is performing the best, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see rotations throughout the season.
Not to mention, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if Calvin's been the guy, you may as well roll with him a little bit. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be your starter for the full entire season. It just means that he's going to be, maybe your starter for week 1, and we'll kind of see how it goes. So. Just because you start week 1 doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed to be, starting all 17 games or 18 games.
Yep. So a quick thing right before we go into the next game, the NFL Top 100 came out. Justin Simmons is at 81.
Way
and
too low.
Wilson's at 61. Like, what are these Madden ratings? Like, what
Well,
what are we doing here?
Well, the thing that's a little bit odd is I think from what I remember, the qualifications about the NFL Top 100 are players actually vote on them, and
yeah.
not
And
only that,
coaches.
but and they actually vote on them, and it's also voted within the season. So, especially from the standpoint, and we all know what this season that Justin had. I mean, it's a little bit odd that you're going to be putting players that, I mean, in my estimation, and yes, I could be biased, sure. One, I'm wearing a Justin Simmons, foundation hoodie, which Mario made, but I mean, like, he's the best safety in the NFL. And so the fact that you're going to be putting him within the range of 81 with a few other safeties that he's honestly better than makes you scratch your head.
Well, he was 45 last year, wasn't he?
Something like that. Yeah.
And he dropped all the way down. I don't know. I don't get it. Okay, so let's go into the Broncos-Rams game. Obviously, we're probably not going to see any starters. So even though this is technically the first game that Von Miller has played against the Broncos, he's not actually going to play.
Von Miller rejoined the Rams?
I know, Broncos-Bills, Mike.
Wait a second. Why did I say Rams? Yeah, Bills.
Because Von was on the Rams.
It's right in front of my face, too. It's right there. Bills.
I'm not going to let that one down.
Bills. Yeah, whatever. I like chicken. Okay, so obviously the starters are probably not going to play. So even though it's Miller's first game against the Broncos, we're probably not going to actually see him play. Do we need to see, or what do we need to see from our guys to make us change our minds about any of them, such as far as the offensive line or the defensive line? What do we need to see for them to secure a spot on the team?
Do you want the cop-out answer or do you want an actual answer?
No, I want an actual answer.
Because I was going to say, get out of the game.
Yes, Bills. I know, Jeff. Sorry. Bills.
I was going to say, get out of the game, injury-free.
So Jeff is a hardcore Bronco fan. He flew out to Denver for the Cowboy game, and he lives in Maine, mind you, and he's driving to Western New York for the Broncos-Bills game. I mean, these are preseason games, and this dude is traveling. I mean, he's hardcore. So...
But yeah, I think to kind of preface the last question I asked, we talked to Ryan about how the offensive line struggled and not being able to have Natane Muti in there, or Natane, however you pronounce it.
Moody.
What do we need to see from the offensive line for them to secure themselves as a backup offensive lineman, such as Graham Glasgow or Wattenberg?
I think you need to see some running yardage, Mike. I mean, that was the real deficit in the game the other day. Was just the running game was virtually non-existent, and that was due to poor offensive line play. What were you going to say, Buckets?
No, I was just going to say competency and production. I mean, like that's what it is. I mean, we're decently set at the line as far as knowing who's most likely going to start the season. It's just about getting them healthy, and our backups are going to be just the ones that can really be competent enough to run the scheme the way it's meant to run, and to be able to produce in the run game as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of players to step up and really take those depth spots.
Well, in particular, the Buffalo Bills are a AFC powerhouse, and you're not going to be an AFC powerhouse if you don't, have any depth. And the Buffalo Bills have really, really good depth, even on the defensive front and the defense in general. And so, for anybody on the offensive side that wants to continue to, continue their hot streak, or in the offensive line case, really, prove their case and prove their worth for being a depth guy or maybe even a starter, you're going to need to really show out, for that game. And so maybe ideally the Buffalo Bills game is probably your ideal hotspot, for that second game for your offensive line, to really show out, maybe showcase maybe who your starters will be on that offensive line. And so I think that, for them, they really have to show that they could be able to stand their ground and, really, move bodies of that Bills defensive line.
Yeah. So what are your predictions for the game? We pull this one out?
We talking about preseason predictions?
Yeah. Why wouldn't it's a game? I don't care who it is.
I gotta look at who's in. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. McDermott isn't like super aggressive in the preseason, I don't think. So I don't know. I mean, Josh Allen might play a little bit. I don't think Russ is going to play at all. So I think they might get on top a little bit early if Josh Allen's going against our second team.
Yeah.
I think the Bills might take. I really like I think they, if not the best, second best roster overall in the NFL. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised
Bills?
if they pulled out. Yeah,
Who's top?
Chargers.
Real okay. Okay.
Me and Boggins are pro Chargers
Okay.
on their roster.
Did you hear the rumors that the Chargers were going to go after Roquan Smith?
My
Why?
shed a tear.
After Bobby Wagner?
No, he's in the Rams.
Oh. Gosh dang it. I just did a Mendogas.
Yeah. See, you did it. Ha! You did it too.
He was so embarrassed he muted himself immediately.
All right, well, it has been fun. I did love having Ryan on the show. Boggins, I'm glad you could join us.
Ryan.
I know it's a struggle to get here, but you're always welcome on the show. So join us as often as you can. But that is going to about do it for us. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, turn on notifications so you know when we post, when we go live. Also, make sure you tune into our other podcasts like the Wild Wild West on Wednesdays at 7:30, 6:30, 5:30, 4:30. The MHRT Rewind every Thursday at 8, 7, 6, 5. And Broncos Breakdown with Bronco Bill every Friday at 8, 7, 6, 5. Thank you guys for joining us. Love you, Broncos. Love you, Broncos country. And we will see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.